Hello again. So today in the series about how the spark of a story becomes a story, I want to talk about the second draft and how important it is. For me, the second draft is actually very much the first draft because, as I mentioned the last time, my first draft is just that, and then I turn a few plot points into an entire first draft of a script. But that first draft is disjointed. It has scenes that absolutely does not need, and it doesn't have scenes that it probably should have. Um, so that first draft is really very much a vomit draft of myself telling myself the story. Um, as I mentioned, I don't feel like I write the story. I feel like I'm more of a journalist, uh, uncovering the story instead of inventing it. And so in the second draft is really where the hard work begins. I tend to print out my first drafts and then write on them very clearly. First draft, not to be used, not to be shown to anyone. Actually, that's not true. I'll show everyone my first draft and do a table read for it, but that's a topic for another discussion. And so with that printed material, I then go through it with a red pen and just cross out every single thing that I think is wrong. I notice those things especially during my table reads. So I do a table read for the first draft, um, in order to be able to hear the voices of the characters and hear the voices of through actors, um, and hear the cringe, the badness of the dialogue, and the horrificness that I've written. Um, and that really helps me to hear and visualize the story that much better, to see all the bad things. Um, and then I take the printed script and I go through it with a red pen and I essentially edit it. That's my first round of editing. It's just on the script physically, with my thoughts and my ideas, and then I don't go into the original file. I create an entirely new. I work in Celtex, so I create an entirely new script in Celtex. Call that draft two, and copy it out. I don't reuse. I never copy and paste um, anything. If I do a second draft, if I do a new draft, I rewrite the entire story because otherwise it can feel disjointed, and it can feel you're going to feel that you copy and pasted this from a previous draft because the language might have evolved, because the situation isn't 100% the same as it was before. And so what I do is I have the printed story there, and I literally have it there, and I type it out again. I type the whole thing again. um that step for me is absolutely non negotiable. I have to type it out fresh. So with every draft, I type the entire script fresh, which is why I tend not to do so many drafts. But yes, so that's very important to me, to physically type out the entirety of the script, um, again. So that's just the physical aspect of what I actually do, the actions I take. Now, the reconstruction that goes on while I retype the script is a lot more subtle. And that is, I think that's the hardest thing, when it comes to writing a story. That is the most difficult thing. Many people who are not writers always think that writing is such a magical process, and that it's such a, oh my God, a mythical thing. You sit down and then worlds come out of you, but it's not. It's work. It's just work. It's just construction and understanding and just typing things. And sometimes those things are, and sometimes they're really good. But this is where creativity ends and craft begins. And there's a difference. There's a difference. There's a difference between a creative endeavor, say when I write short stories, or when I write poetry, or when I write passionate speeches or something. That comes from a very kind of inspired place, and that comes from a place where muses live, and you know, fawns frolic in the meadow. But my second draft did not come from that place. It does not come from a creative place, and it does not have anything to do with creativity. It has everything to do with craft. This is where I need to understand the story. This is where I need to understand every single aspect that goes into the story, every single character. I mentioned the last time in my first video that I don't ever work on character before I type up the first draft. I don't. But here now, I have to understand the characters. I got to know them already in the first draft. I know what they're going to end up doing. I know what they're going to end up, looking like, who they're going to end up interacting with, who their friends are going to be, who their enemies are going to be. But who are they? Who are these people that I choose to spend this part of my life with? Are they assholes? Are they kind? Are they both? Which everybody always is both. And I really try to understand. I'd never really go into their motivation or anything. I don't, their motivation is there. I don't need to question it. I trust that they have it. I trust that these characters understand who they are and who they want to be and where they're going. I've already been on that journey with them. I see that journey. I don't need to, dissect that journey. All I need to understand is, can we sit down, you and I, you being the character, can this character and I sit down together, have a cup of coffee, and they tell me their version of the story that I've already seen? It's like, again, it is a very journalistic approach. So here I'm sitting down with all the witnesses to the story that I've already written about. And now I'm trying to understand, okay, what was your angle? How are you looking at this? Right? And if it's a very, very simple script and it's a very straightforward story, like the mine, for example, was a very, very kind of, straightforward little beautiful, love story between two star-crossed teenagers who fall in love. It's I can understand these characters very quickly. Here's a feisty young teenager who's, hopelessly in love. In that, I know who you are. I know what that feels like. I know what you're going through. So those characters are that's the thing that I do with regards to understanding. Now, the story itself, in this very first proper draft, I don't do much with the story. I trust that the thing that I've written is already works already, because, like I mentioned in the last video, if it didn't work, I don't do the work. I don't care. I abandon it. So I trust the story plot points are there. I can see in many of my first drafts, I see a lot of repetition, things that I need to get rid of. That is what I do when I feel like, oh, I just typed this bit of information already. I don't need to type this again. So that's where a lot of stuff gets cut out. Or when I feel like, oh my God, we need another interaction between these two characters, or we need a bit more explanation as to what's going on in this specific part. That's when I normally feel that and read that in the table read, and then I normally feel that when I go through it with my kind of fine-toothed comb in the very, very first edit. And that's what I do. I add little scenes, I add little moments, I add little character interactions. I don't do big structural things here. So that's what later drafts are for, which I'm going to talk about in a different video. So yes, this is the work that I do, and this is the hardest work that I do on the first proper draft on the second draft, on the first rewrite. And a big factor that comes into play for this one is the time frame. So sometimes I will let a first draft rest for, a year before I even attempt going into a second draft, because the story just doesn't make itself known to me in this time. And also I feel like if I let it rest for a long time, I'm not as bound to the first draft as I am if I work on it straight away after I've written it. So there's definitely a pause there. After the first draft is done, it needs to go away. I work on other things. I keep writing. I'm always writing, but there's there's stories I haven't read that I wrote a year ago that I haven't read since. And I'm sure they're, they warrant work, and I'm looking forward to working on them again. Once I found a whole almost completed script on self-text that I'd completely forgotten that I even wrote. I must have written it at some point in 2019, and I never realized that I wrote it. And I found it again a few months ago, and I was like, okay, you exist. So those first drafts are very much a repertoire that can be used and worked on. And that break is hugely important. So if you keep filing away and working away on the same thing for so long, you can't see the wood for the trees anymore, because you're so stuck into your story that sometimes it's really, really healthy to let go and say, okay, I did all the work that I wanted to do on this specific thing. Let it go, let me breathe, write something else, and then come back to it with completely fresh eyes. And then I don't, obviously nobody has to do as I do, but I then retype the whole thing so that I really feel like I've written it again, to give it the attention it deserves. And so, yeah, that's my take on the hard work. At the hardest part of writing for me is that second draft, and the effort it takes, and the time it takes especially. So yes, thank you again for listening, and